and welcome to SpyHards podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur.
And Cam, I think this week an adventure is just beginning.
And ending. Because this week we are going to tackle Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins, the action, espionage, comedy. I don't know. It's a whole bunch of things in one. It's basically a 1985 motion picture starring Fred Ward and Joel Grey.
Yeah, I don't think this film knows what it wants to be, but we'll get into that. But first, everyone's favorite, the letterboxd.com synopsis. Away we go. Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins. A hero who doesn't exist must save America from an enemy he never knew he had. An officially dead cop is trained to become an extraordinarily unique assassin in the service of the US president.
Not bad. I think that actually sums it up well. A lot of the time when you do these cult movies, the person writing the synopsis gets a little too invested and goes down some weird rabbit holes. But this one, I think that sums it up pretty good.
For a film that's all over the place, the synopsis is pretty on point.
That's right. That's right. Now, I am curious, Scott. This movie's called The Adventure Begins in North America, but you had a different title, right?
Yeah, apparently so. I mean, I hadn't seen it in the cinema or ever heard of it, but looking at it on IMDb, apparently in the UK, it was called Remo, Unarmed and Dangerous.
What do you think is the better title?
I have two answers to that question. At the time, I think An Adventure Begins sounds cool,
Yeah.
but knowing that the adventure never continued, I go with Unarmed and Dangerous.
I think you've got to mash the two together, though, because I think you want Remo Williams, not just Remo. But I think Unarmed and Dangerous is a far better description of what makes this character unique.
Don't you think Unarmed and Dangerous just sounds like a sort of Naked Gun film?
Kind of, but this movie, well, we'll get to it. This movie definitely treads into Naked Gun territory a fair amount of the time.
Just not as good as Naked Gun does.
No, of course not. Nothing does it as well as Naked Gun. Naked Gun is the finest motion picture in the history of motion pictures.
No, I definitely hadn't seen this in the cinema because I wasn't born yet and I had no experience of it. But Cam, anything from you?
I would have been about 4 years old probably when this came out, and I feel like my parents weren't eager to take me to Remo Williams. The Adventure Begins when I was 4.
I mean, it's the perfect age to understand this film.
It is, but it is one that I just kept seeing the name kind of float about over the years. I mean, I watch a lot of, cult films, but I just had never seen this. And it was one that I would see it pop up on message boards, or you'd see, I think Joe Blow did a article a handful of years ago about how it's like one of the really fun movies you haven't seen sort of thing. And so it's one that I was always kind of aware of. I knew it was not a box office hit, but I knew that it did have a certain amount of fandom around it.
This is definitely one of the ones that I've discovered for the podcast. I don't know if that's for the better or not.
Well, we'll get into that.
But yeah, Cam, this film has two titles, which is bizarre in itself. But I mean, what else can you tell me about it?
Okay, so yeah, because it's the type of movie that when you watch it, you're like, how did this happen? Like, because that's not even a qualitative thing, because there's movies like Buckaroo Banzai, for example, another cult film. When you watch it, you're just literally like, how did this movie happen? This is insane. Like, who signed these checks? That was kind of what I was wondering about Remo Williams. So basically what happened was a lot of the execs who worked for United Artists during the James Bond era left and went to go work for Orion Films. And Orion was really eager to launch their own franchise that would rival 007.
On a nice note, I can see why they want to do that. Like an American 007. Makes perfect sense.
It does make sense. I mean, they pitched it as red, white, and blue collar Bond. Not bad.
It's actually a better hook than what I read earlier.
Yeah, and so they wanted to adapt the Destroyer novel series by Warren Murphy and Richard Sapir. The original Destroyer novel, which Remo Williams is the character's name in those novels. It's not like a Harry Palmer situation. The original novel came from 1971, and it was called Created the Destroyer. Now, this series has been going quite a while. I want to know, Scott, could you guess how many Remo Williams Destroyer novels there are?
Well, if this is an adventure begins and Fred Ward is clearly in his 40s in this, I'm going to have to say like 20 books before the guy dies.
Okay, so 20 is your guess?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's actually over 150.
Oh.
Remo Williams is one of the most prolific characters in American literature, it would seem.
Move over, Mark Twain. You've got fucking
No.
Remo Williams here.
Yeah, when I read that, I was like, "That's insane." So there's like 153 novels, and then there's some like sort of anthology books. There's manuals in terms of the martial art used in this film. There's like all these spin-off projects tied to the Destroyer universe.
I can just see the United Artists / Orion Pictures office when someone pitched this. Like, guys, there's 150 books. We've got
Yeah.
gold for a lifetime. Your grandkids will be going to Princeton.
Yeah, like they are having to create new James Bond films pretty soon. You know, their View to a Kill is coming out in the same year as Remo Williams, and I mean, they don't know what that movie is like based on because you know at that point they've run out of Ian Fleming novels. So we will not have that problem. We have 150 plus Remo Williams adventures.
Everyone lights a cigar and is like, money.
The sequel to this one would have been called Remo Williams: The Never-Ending Story.
Okay. Well, I can understand why they went down this route. Makes perfect sense. And they've obviously, the book series obviously works because you have 150. You must have had people reading them.
You must. Although I do have questions as to how big the readership is, or they're kind of just pulp novels that are cranked out like, you know, every 6 months kind of thing.
What do you think about like Game of Thrones? Before the TV series came along, I read some of the books, but not all of them. But it wasn't that popular. You couldn't say like, hey, you know, do you know who Daenerys is to your hairdresser?
Sure. Or also, you know, we are both Star Trek fans, and there are an endless amount of Star Trek novels, whether it's, you know, TNG novels, original series novels, and obviously they sell well enough to continue them being cranked out on the regular, but I don't think they are, you know, cracking the top 10 book sales lists on the New York Times.
Hey, you leave Bill Shatner's Captain's Trilogy alone.
Well, that one aside, if it's Shatner, it's gold.
That's what he says.
It wins the annual literary prize. I can't remember what it's called. I don't know. The Bookie?
I thought you were going to say like issued by William Shatner himself.
Oh, that too. He founded it and rewards himself every year.
Never mind his ghostwriters.
Yeah. So the producers of this movie, they wanted Bond credentials tied to this thing. And so they hired Guy Hamilton, the director of such Bond films as Goldfinger, The Man with the Golden Gun, Live and Let Die, and Diamonds Are Forever. And they got writer Christopher Wood, who wrote The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. Like, they were going whole hog into the Bond world. They wanted that pedigree. They really thought, okay, we put these two talents together, we have the next 007 series.
So you're telling me the director of this did like Goldfinger, Diamonds Are Forever, and the writer wrote Moonraker and The Spy Who Loved Me?
Yeah.
Okay, just for reference, listeners, this isn't one of those shows where I just pretend to learn information. I don't do the research before this. I genuinely have to hear this information for the first time from Cam.
Yeah.
This is amazing. How on earth? Why is this film the way it is?
I don't know. And I look forward to talking about Guy Hamilton, the director, going into this episode, because I think there's actually a conversation to be had about the films of Guy Hamilton. We have covered him before. He actually did Funeral in Berlin. So, you know, that's like 20 years before this movie. At this point in his career, he was mostly doing like mystery adaptations. He did The Mirror Cracked, which was a Miss Marple film. He also had done Evil Under the Sun, which was an Agatha Christie Poirot mystery. So his career had kind of, I don't want to say wound down, but it was kind of in a little bit of a quieter place, because this is a guy who, you know, a decade before Remo Williams is very strongly being considered. And actually, I think he actually may have gotten the job to direct the original Superman and had to drop out at the last minute. So like, he's not quite at that blockbuster Helmer, kind of position that he was earlier in his career.
So Guy Hamilton almost did Superman.
He did, yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, whole other world, right?
Yeah. Well, but hey, at least we got Remo Williams.
That's right. and the that Superman, his adventure ended, whereas Remo Williams, it's still going.
We're keeping it alive.
That's right. So when it came to casting Remo Williams, again, you are casting an icon in theory. So you really want to embrace, I guess, the character and find the perfect actor. We can talk about whether they found the right one, but a couple people considered. A very young Bruce Willis was considered, and at this point, he was kind of a nobody, so he did not get the job. And Ed Harris was also considered. Um, well, both of those guys, I think, would have contributed something that, well, I don't know if it would have improved the movie. I don't know, but I mean, you have Ed Harris. There's a certain amount of legitimacy, especially.
I'm not really familiar with Fred Ward and his catalog of work to really take a punt on that. I don't know if he has been in loads of films that I haven't seen, but I know Ed Harris and I definitely know Bruce Willis.
Yeah, like Fred Ward is one of those guys, when you actually look up his IMDb, he's been in like everything you've ever seen. But the two movies that I always thought of were the original Tremors. He's also in the sequel, but the original Tremors, he's fantastic in. It's such a fun movie. And then he was also in the third Naked Gun film, Naked Gun 33 and a Third, The Final Insult. He was the villain Rocco, and he's really funny in that movie as well. So he's a long working actor. I think he's maybe retired now. He's approaching 80 years old, but he's one of those guys. He's very reliable.
I mean, that makes him what 40 in this film came out, late 30s.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess that is sort of that James Bond casting age, right? Like,
Yeah.
usually the Bond actors are around that age.
I mean, how old was Daniel Craig?
I think he was like maybe 37 or something.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So, when it came time to cast the character of Chiun, who is Remo Williams's, I guess, master, I don't know, trainer, this character in the movie, and we'll be talking about this in depth, is a Korean character, and they quote unquote couldn't find an Asian actor for the role. Scott, there was none.
Okay.
1985, no Asian actors whatsoever.
I'm not buying that, buddy. I'm not buying that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Asian actors, and obviously, like, even if you want to go outside of Korean actors, because boy, in 1985 they sure would have. The fact that they're saying they couldn't find an Asian actor, period, is absurd. And so instead, they approached Joel Grey, best known for the movie Cabaret, which he won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for. Joel Grey turned down the role initially for fear of offending the Korean population, but they brought in makeup artist Carl Fullerton, who is a very well-established makeup guy. He worked on Silence of the Lambs. He's also Denzel Washington's personal makeup artist in pretty much all of his movies for the last couple decades. They brought Carl Fullerton in to show how they could apply prosthetics to Joel Grey to make him look like a Korean man. And he was so won over by the makeup, he realized he could probably pull it off.
Look, we talk about like the behind the scenes stuff, but this is irredeemable.
Yeah. And this did get a Golden Globe nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Like, we will have in the future of this podcast, we've already tackled the yellowface concept in Dr. No, which had it as well, but this movie really doubles down. And I was genuinely shocked to be tackling a movie from 1985 where it was so prominent. Like, it's the sort of thing when you see it in Breakfast at Tiffany's, you roll your eyes and you go like, what was in the water in the 1960s? I didn't know about this going into this movie, and I was genuinely shocked. In a movie in 1985, it was so prominent, and also that it was, while very controversial, often embraced. It was so weird.
Well, look, as you say, we've tackled it already. I mean, we've got You Only Live Twice coming at some point this year. That's got its own problems, and I'm not going to not talk about this character. I'm not going to delete him from my memory of the film. But we have to make a point that this is. I mean, there's no way that this should be allowed, even in 85, even in 65. They should have found an appropriate actor, even if it took longer, and this shouldn't have ever happened. Simple.
Cast an unknown. Just
Sure.
cast an unknown. Yeah. If you can't find an Asian actor in Hollywood, which seems unlikely, find someone. Like, create a new star. That's something that like they did when it came time to casting I think of Kato in the Green Hornet film with Seth Rogen. The actor they got, Jay Chow, was not known at all in North America, but was well established back in his homeland. And why not transport a new talent over? Like, again, I know I'm arguing with 1985 Hollywood, and maybe that's insane unto itself, but yeah.
Well, the other problem is unfortunately, this stuff still kind of happens now.
It does. Yeah, it's going to happen, I think, less and less, though. But you can see even in like a movie like, you remember Doctor Strange,
I was
where
just
they
going to
had
mention that film, exactly.
yeah, where you had the ancient one who was an Asian man in the comic books, and Marvel was obviously rightly concerned about having a stereotypical Asian character in their movie. Went the Tilda Swinton route, and still there was a lot of blowback over that about whitewashing a character. It's an issue that is going to be grappled with a lot of adaptations, I think, of older material. I know they talk about doing, say, like a Flash Gordon movie in the future. Well, like you've got Ming the Merciless in there. It's going to be an ongoing battle, but movies like this, boy, have they not aged well.
No, this is, as I said, damning at any point. But if you think about it, it's 85. They should have been beyond this stuff.
Yeah, and it also has that kind of anti-Asian sentiment as well, which was very prominent in Hollywood films of a certain era as well.
Yeah, there's a few jokes in there that are sort of aimed exactly as that. I mean, you could say there's jokes aimed the other way from him, but it shouldn't be happening. But hey ho.
Yeah. So, some other production notes I'll mention. Um, the production ran out of money at a certain point, and so the finale, which was supposed to be a big, over-the-top, explosive action sequence, got really downgraded. And I think that's fairly telling as well. You'll notice it, I think, when you watch the movie. A couple other things. Fred Ward apparently did 50% of his own stunts. That seems like the kind of number you throw out there to the press, but I go 50%. Well, that's probably none of the dangerous stuff whatsoever.
No, like he's harnessed to that log, stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure.
maybe. Sure. And Dick Clark was a producer on this film. And the only way they got the Statue of Liberty shooting done was he agreed to appear in a Statue of Liberty public service announcement. And that secured the shooting rights.
Who?
Dick Clark was actually a big icon, I guess, over in North America and primarily America. He hosted the New Year's Eve countdown every year. He was known as America's oldest teenager. He died a couple years ago, but he was kind of like that, kind of like a Carson Daly figure of his era, or Ryan Seacrest of his era.
Who?
Okay, well, these are like, do you not know who Ryan Seacrest is?
It's a name I like hear in pop culture, but I don't think I could pick him out of a lineup.
Okay, doesn't translate. Okay, yeah. I mean, he's just one of those big. I don't know what your equivalent would be. He's like the big sort of MC guy, shows up, does a lot of like music countdown shows, appears doing interviews elsewhere. It's just kind of that public figure interviewer type, broadcaster type.
For the British listeners, by all means, message us what you think is the equivalent. I would say it's Ant and Dec.
Okay, cool. Yeah, same kind of idea, probably.
Can't know who they are. Yeah.
So Dick Clark was like the legend of his era. And
okay.
So when I saw his name in the producer credits, I did think that was a little strange.
So the only reason I had him in is so they could get the Statue of Liberty stuff in.
He must have had some sort of like rights tied into the book or something. But yeah, that was just how he got that Statue of Liberty shooting done. He's not typically a movie producer, though.
America's oldest teenager.
Yeah.
It's such a weird title. Anyway.
That's my nickname as well now.
Like, you're America's oldest man.
No kidding. So, as for the box office, this movie, Scott, I'm going to give you some comparison. Released in 1985, Back to the Future comes out. Big hit, right?
Mm-hmm,
that movie cost $19 million. Okay? So, when we talk about budgets, sometimes it's tough because people go, well, movies cost $150 million nowadays. So I'm sure they cost that then. Um, no, 19 million was, not a huge cost for Back to the Future, but it was a decent budget. Um, how much do you think Remo Williams cost?
If Back to the Future was 19, and that looks terrific, and this ran out of money at some point as well, 10?
$40 million.
What? There's no way that translates to the screen. What?
This was a very expensive movie.
Kate Mulgrew must be asking for some dough in the 80s.
Apparently, yeah. I don't know. There must have been a lot of money going out the back door.
Maybe to Fred Clark.
Maybe just the shooting locations, like shooting on the, around the Statue of Liberty and stuff, cost a lot of money.
Well, I had tons of questions about that, which we'll get into with the review of the film, I suppose. But were they actually on the Statue of Liberty?
No, they had to create a replica for anything of him on the Statue of Liberty.
Okay.
So maybe just, I don't know. It wasn't that expensive to shoot in New York in those days. Nowadays it is, but boy, I really don't know. Maybe just a lot of the stunt work. Like there is a lot of big stunts in this movie. You got me, honestly.
I have no retort. I don't know where this money went, honestly.
Yeah. So the budget, $40 million. The domestic box office, 14.3.
1-4.
Yes.
Oof.
And this movie did not open internationally, so its worldwide total was $14.3 million.
Hang on then. Why do I have a British title for it if it didn't open here?
Well, it probably video cassette, right?
Or home rental and stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's such a disappointment.
This movie is very American, and if it bombs in America, they're probably like, there's no place for this overseas.
Not when you have Dick Clark references.
So it landed at number 58 at the box office for that year of 1985, right between the movie Clue, which is another cult classic and actually a pretty fun movie. And it was one spot above Return of the Living Dead, another cult classic that I actually really like.
Yeah, I like both those films.
Yeah, they're both really good. So,
Okay.
The top three for this year. We talked about this when we did The Man with One Red Shoe, but number 1 was Out of Africa. Number 2, Back to the Future. Number 3, Rambo First Blood Part 2. And some of the other espionage films on the list. And number 10, you had Spies Like Us, the spy comedy with Chevy Chase we'll be tackling some point in the future. Number 13 was View to a Kill. Number 52 was Falcon and the Snowman, which is a Sean Penn film. Number 76, Gotcha, a movie people have requested we cover, and I look forward to doing at some point. And number 93, The Man with One Red Shoe.
Oh, Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
Not
one of his big hits.
I miss you and your shoe.
I miss you.
Perfect. End the show.
Yeah, exactly. This movie was nominated for an Oscar for Best Makeup.
What?
It lost to Mask, the Eric Stoltz Cher drama.
Wait. Okay. Oh, right. Sorry, I have to sort of assimilate this information. So they gave a Golden Globe nomination to a guy, a Caucasian male in Korean makeup.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, like Remo Williams was a box office bomb that went nowhere, but the awards circuit was really eager to reward Joel Grey's character.
They really wanted that adventure to continue.
I guess so. That very problematic adventure. Couple other things I'll just note. Christopher Wood, the writer, he kind of blamed this movie on Fred Ward. He says Ed Harris would have been a better choice. I don't know. Sure.
What is his criticism about Fred Ward?
He didn't have the charisma to pull off the role. So
I don't know about that. Well, I suppose we'll get into it, but
we'll get into that. There was also a Remo Williams TV pilot called Remo Williams: The Prophecy that was supposed, they wanted it to air in like the 1988 season, and it starred Jeffrey Meek and Roddy McDowall as the Korean character. So Roddy McDowall, folks, Roddy McDowall, that famous Korean actor.
Uh, this is
Yeah,
yeah. I'm never reading these
that
books now.
that pilot did not air. It showed up, I think, at some point, like way, way later, decades later. People have seen it. Like, I think there's like maybe 5 or 6 reviews of it on Letterboxd. I have no intention of watching it though.
Okay.
Yeah. And we are going to be talking obviously about the Joel Grey character and the yellowface aspect, going forward in this review. But I do want to just link, check the show notes to an article by Walter Chaw. And he, I think, can talk about this far more profoundly than we can. So he has an article called Remo Williams Never Became the American James Bond, but it definitely represented America for better and for worse. And he talks about the movie in terms of his own childhood nostalgia for the film. So look for that in the show notes. It's, again, a very well written piece. And I think people who want to hear sort of a perspective that is maybe more appropriate than ours can jump over and read that. So that'll be on Decider, the website Decider.
Okay. Anything else for us, Cam?
No, that about wraps up Remo Williams. The adventure begins.
Well, let's end it. Okay. Cam, go first. What do you think about this film?
This is one I'd actually picked up at a thrift store on DVD maybe like 6 months ago or something like that. And I just never had watched it. And I thought, okay, well, let's watch this. I really didn't know anything about the Joel Grey character at all when I sat down to watch it. And the movie starts, and it's kind of the crappy DVD transfer where it's like, it's been formatted to your screen at 4:3, aspect ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, perfect. That's kind of what I want. Like, I want an 80s action movie that's set at 4:3. It feels like the sort of thing I would have rented when I was like 17 years old with friends or something. I like this. I'm getting into the vibe. I'm really digging the 80s score. It's kind of like the perfect, lost 80s movie I had never seen. And then the movie proceeded to run, and my enthusiasm for it really just kind of slowly died. Once the Joel Grey stuff comes into play, it was like, oh, this is uncomfortable. And there's a lot of this movie is spent trying to invest you emotionally in the relationship between Joel Grey's character and Fred Ward. And to me, like, that's just dead on arrival because it's so awkward and uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Just in terms of everything to do with that character. And I thought Fred Ward was actually kind of terrible in this movie. I think you want someone who really has the charisma where I care about Remo Williams and I want the adventure to continue. And he really just felt very flat. And I think that's really weird because I've liked Fred Ward in so many other things that I was just really shocked. He just seems kind of lost here. So, like, Remo Williams, I could kind of appreciate some of the physical stunts. It's so great to see practical stunts in a 1980s movie. Like, that to me was the highlight. But this thing is paced like cement rolling down a hill. Like, it is very slow paced, I found, and just very lethargic. And going forward into this review, I want to talk a little bit more about the pace in regards to Guy Hamilton's Bond films. But what did you think?
It's kind of hard to come back from that because you really hit a lot of the same points that I felt about it. If as a whole, I was really digging the score at the beginning, and the score is one of the things I've got down as the things I enjoyed about this film.
Yeah, and Craig Safin did the score, so let's shout him out. Craig Safin, good job.
Thank you for that. But like, it just slowly unravels as it goes along. You just think as soon as the cop thing, he gets like fake killed, and then apparently he looks different in the hospital, but he looks exactly the same to me. Did you get that?
Scott, how dare you? He shaved his mustache.
I'm waiting for the day when I chop off my quarantine beard and my dog just gets completely spooked by the concept of me with a chin.
Yeah.
What have you done? That's my dog talking, by the way. No, but just, I don't know. I felt like the film wanted to be funny, and it wasn't funny. I felt like it wanted to deliver action scenes, and they weren't very impactful. And I felt like, again, like you mentioned about the connection between Remo and Chiyun, they're meant to have this sort of father-son bond, whereas they didn't mesh at all. And if that's the script or the actors, I don't know. But I didn't care about their relationship.
Well, uh,
And I think that's what the film hinges on, because the bad guy is completely bland.
is this the blandest villain we've encountered on the SpyHards podcast?
Like, if you think about the worst films we've had so far, the worst film is Men in Black 2, but at least you remember Lara Flynn Boyle.
There was also the Harry Palmer TV movies.
Oh, well, Michael Gambon and his really bad Russian accent.
Yeah, I remember Michael Gambon. He's memorable.
Yeah, yeah. I think this could be it. This could be our blandest cookie cutter villain of all time so far.
Yeah, I mean, even the dude Ed Begley yelling "strong, strong, strong" in Billion Dollar Brain. He's memorable.
You remember that guy's face, and
Oh yeah,
the computers at least. But like there's it's kind of like two villains, but they work for the same organization. One's a general and one's just a guy, I think, like a senator or something like that. But I kept confusing who was who, and I didn't know who was working for whom. I just didn't care. And so I didn't feel the tension of like Remo in danger. I knew he would get out of it because the adventure is just beginning. And then you've got, obviously the problems with the Chiun character all the way through as well. And I have to try and think like in two minds. You've got it as like a 80s film. So if I'm sat in the cinema in 1985 in America, because it didn't come out here, would I have enjoyed this? As like an action romp.
yeah. I don't think I'm trying to think of what 80s action movies were like at this point, because stuff like Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, that comes in like 2-3 years after this movie. So like, what would I have been watching? I guess like you would have had like the Chuck Norris action films. You would have had the early Schwarzenegger. So you would have had like the first couple Conan films and maybe a Raw Deal. But like sort of the everything we think about as 80s action movies really kind of starts around that like 87 mark, where you're getting like Predator and that sort of thing. You would have had the Terminator, I guess, in 84. So there was the odd real bright spot, but I feel like a lot of it was kind of junky.
Kind of junky. Yeah, we'll add that to the list of criticisms on this film. But I don't know. I just don't think that there's enough there to enjoy. So I think the cinema going people would have got bored.
If they'd shown up.
Well, yeah, the 10 people that showed up obviously got bored and didn't tell anyone else. But yeah, I just don't think there's enough there. And even with all the problems stripped out, as if you're just taking it as a piece of the time.
Yeah, well, I mean, this movie, the training under Chiun is, would you say the first hour?
I think it runs longer. You get to that scene where he's like, is he meant to be hovering on the beach? I didn't really understand that.
Well, that's a whole other thing in terms of the tone, but I wonder if this movie wanted to capitalize on The Karate Kid, which had come out the year before. So, like, the training does go on forever. And I was curious when it started, and I saw that Joel Grey was playing this character. I was like, okay, this could go one of two ways. They're going to try to create either a quote-unquote respectful Asian character, because I think of like a movie like, I don't know, Love is a Many Splendored Thing, which was an Academy Award-nominated film from back in the day, where you had Caucasian actress Jennifer Jones playing an Asian character, but playing it very seriously, like, this is a movie about tackling racism. It's now completely outdated and ridiculous to watch, but at the time, there was like sincerity behind the intentions and the performance, at least. Or you go the grotesque caricature route, which is like Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's. So I was very curious to see which way this would go. And it's weird in that it seems to balance the two, in that it does a lot of grotesque caricature, but also expect us to emotionally invest ourselves in this character. It's very bizarre.
And then you don't.
Yeah, it's completely dead on arrival. And it's like, I've seen Joel Grey in other things. I liked him in Cabaret. Scott, I don't know if you remember, we saw him at a Star Trek convention.
Did we?
Yeah, he was there a handful of years ago. He guest starred on a Voyager episode, and he showed up and did a panel. I don't know if you attended that panel. I went. We did not get a Kate Mulgrew, Joel Grey reunion, though, at that convention.
Did he try and tap on her wrist again?
I do not recall any questions about Remo Williams at that convention.
Yeah, I hope not to him. I mean, I almost want to ask her a question if I ever go to a convention that she's at again.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what she had to say, because Kate Mulgrew is a fiery personality, and I would love to hear what she would have to say about this movie now. But I mean, I've liked Joel Grey and things, but it's the type of performance that no matter how committed he was to this bit, the performance is just dead. There's nothing to draw from it. Like, uh, it's completely a disposable performance that is you can only say negative things about. So it wasn't worth the effort in the first place.
Well, the thing is, he was correct in the beginning.
Yeah,
He shouldn't have taken the part. His gut said don't do it, and he shouldn't have done it.
yeah, because I can't even talk about the Chiun character as being interesting or effective because he's not.
So I didn't know about the Karate Kid coming out the year before. I don't have years in my head like you do.
Hmm.
So I can definitely see how it's trying to take some of those influences from it. But, it's like he wants to be Mr. Miyagi in a sense, but also play it straight, whereas that film had some humor to it.
Right.
But then obviously Remo's meant to make the jokes, but Fred Ward isn't funny. So what you have is just this sort of dead air where they're waiting for the audience to laugh.
Well, okay, I'm glad you brought that up. Is Remo Williams meant to be funny? Because I felt like he sometimes was supposed to be funny.
Well, I mean, his first words in the film are "suck wall." Is
I
that
mean,
is that funny? I don't know. I didn't laugh, but
he's introduced as sort of this lazy police officer, I guess, who's just like sitting in his car, ignoring calls, eating hamburgers. Um, and then he, is brought into this Cure organization. Um, I didn't realize it was called Cure until about halfway through the movie,
mhm.
but it's sort of a organization that was founded by JFK, and they conduct elaborate assassinations, kind of like The Mechanic with Jason Statham, where the assassinations are meant to look like accidents. That's sort of what Cure's gig is, and he's inducted into this, and a lot of it feels like sort of the wisecracking agent who's supposed to be kind of undercutting all of the seriousness of the mission and the organization, but nothing he says is funny.
It just doesn't land. And you think like up until that point before he meets Chiun, he there's lines being delivered by J.A. Preston's character, which is kind of like his handler, basically.
Mhm. Yeah.
You're going to have terror for breakfast, pressure for lunch, and aggravation for sleep. You're like, okay, this is kind of funny. He got makeup done or whatever it is. But then as soon as this Chiun character turns up, I just feel like then it is, as you said, dead on arrival. But there was a glimmer of hope at the start.
Yeah, like I find everything involving that hour with Chion, you're just waiting for moments that don't make you cringe. Like
Mm.
that's it. And so it's like Chion will have a moment that's sort of an emotional moment. You're like, okay, look, the actor's trying to get emotion across. Let's try to, at least acknowledge that. And then immediately that's followed up with some sort of very racist commentary on Korean society. And I don't think, we talked when we did Condor Man about how they don't know anything about comic books. This movie knows absolutely nothing about Korean society whatsoever.
Oh,
So
no, absolutely nothing. And the other thing I'll say about the Joel Grey's performance, which I think is more to do with the script than him, is by the end you're meant to think that there's a relationship developing between Chien and Remo. But during his training, the hour in the middle where he's doing all his training, he doesn't ever express any interest. He's just kind of like, ugh, Remo's here. I guess I have to train him. There's no like off-camera looks where he's like, oh, I wonder if he's okay. To get the sense that he's a nice guy. He even says, oh yeah, I'm going to kill you if you don't do this.
yeah, and also Remo doesn't seem to care either. He's completely indifferent to all of the training. It's very weird. And I want to also note he's being trained in the Korean martial art of Sinanju. I may be pronouncing that a little wrong, but nonetheless, it's fictional. It's
Yeah.
not a real martial art.
Yeah, he mentions real ones like jiu-jitsu and karate and stuff like that, and just dismisses them and says Sinanju is the best one. Okay, whatever. Yeah, but Remo doesn't care. Chien doesn't care, and then we don't care.
And again, we get into that sort of the racism of Asian people having mystical powers because this Sinanju martial art is completely magic. It's entirely
I'm glad yeah.
yeah, it's all based on like levitating apparently. A lot of like I can touch you with one finger and magical things will happen. It's really crazy. It's the type of thing I hate seeing in old movies that have martial arts. Like we are kind of we're spoiled now. We get movies like The Raid which have incredible martial arts. I hate when I watch 80s action movies that have martial arts and it's like an awkward, usually white dude, like poking someone with a finger, and then they fall down.
This is kind of what I was pivoting off before when I spoke about the connection to Karate Kid. But like, it doesn't do anything with the martial arts. There is barely any martial arts.
Hmm.
If anything, it's all wire work and super genius dogs. Like I don't understand it, and so that kind of brings me into what you mentioned earlier, which is the tone. It's all over the place. Does it want to have? Is this a fantasy film? Is this a thriller?
Well, do they want us to care about the espionage slash spy plot? Because I sure didn't. And this is where maybe we introduce Guy Hamilton to the proceedings, because Guy Hamilton, he made Goldfinger. And people go, I mean, one of the all time great Bond films, right? Like, if it's not your favorite, it's the one that, at least in terms of pop culture, has the most probably cachet, I would think.
Yep.
Um, but he also made Live and Let Die, The Man with the Golden Gun, and Diamonds Are Forever. And I like all three of those movies to varying degrees, but they do not have a strong sense of pace. They are very lackadaisical. They go on weird tangents. That's kind of what I like about them, honestly. But this is not the guy to bring over to this is a movie that I think wants to have a certain amount of momentum.
Hmm.
And Guy Hamilton, that doesn't seem to be his specialty. Goldfinger feels like the outlier of his Bond movies.
See, I hadn't noticed that particularly myself, but at least those later Bond films had Bond. So even if it was slow, you could be like, well, hey, it's Sean Connery.
Yeah.
This has Fred Ward.
Well, okay. And let's take another James Bond parallel here. Let's look at the movie Dr. No.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. No introduces a somewhat unknown actor and creates a compelling story around him and invests a lot of characteristics into this Bond character that we will remember. Shaken, not stirred. Moments where he's killing Dent, like the assassin mode of James Bond. What does this movie establish? Just walking away from it. You watched it twice. I mean, all praise to you, Scott. What did this movie, walking away from, tell you about Remo Williams? Like, do you have any sense of who this character is beyond, like, he knows, like, martial arts?
No, I took a minute to think about it. I don't. He doesn't care about his country, and yet he does. Like, he doesn't want to work for the Cure. Sorry, Cure. It's not the 80s, prog rock band.
I would love it if he was in The Cure next to Robert Smith wearing mascara.
This wasn't recorded on a Friday, unfortunately. But he doesn't seem to care about that. He acts like he's above everything. Like he's too good for the situation. And then by the end, even when he's like in mortal danger or supposed to be in mortal danger, he's just brushing everything off. Why would anyone care about this character?
Well, Guy Hamilton did direct the second Harry Palmer story, and that is an agent who, again, doesn't really want to be working for his agency. He does care about the missions, though, and I think Harry Palmer is a much more specific character, whether you like those movies or not. I think you walk out of the Ipcris file with an understanding of who Harry Palmer is. Versus Remo Williams, I mean, I feel like the Chiun character with obviously has a barrage of issues with that character. He's the only one that has a specific personality in the whole movie, unfortunately, given the character. But Remo Williams is the one I would think, want to establish as a character you want to see the adventure continue with.
Well, Chiun is one dimensional,
Yeah,
in itself, but at least he is the trainer, the master. You got that sort of stereotype. That is what he is. That's fine. We understand that. Remo's meant to be our hero, but he's so ill-formed. And I'm just trying to think in my head now what I would try and do differently to save this character in the film.
you've got to give him a personality quirk or something. Like, if he is kind of snide, you've got to make his snide remarks funny and make them really pop. It feels like Fred Ward kind of mutters them. Like, they don't have any sort of like, Fred Ward can be very funny. He's very funny in Tremors or also in Naked Gun, but it just feels he's so subdued in this. Like, I don't understand why this character feels like he's half asleep.
So would you want someone who's just more animated then?
Or just unleash the Fred Ward I know is there. Like, it feels like they're playing him as a lot of the time, almost just like a silent action movie character, which he just doesn't pop in because Fred Ward, I don't know that I would say he's a great physical performer.
No, he clearly does some of the stunts as we mentioned earlier, and he's present in the scenes. But yeah, his delivery is flat, and I don't think that helps. I'm not sure what I would do to fix the film. I don't think adding a quirk or some personality would do enough to save the character. I think it is partly to do with the actor.
Hmm.
And I like Fred Ward in the films you've mentioned, but I just think it's a bit of a lost cause.
I mean, is Fred Ward a lead? Maybe that's the question because a lot of the movies I'm citing, he's not the star. Tremors, Kevin Bacon is the star of the movie. Maybe Fred Ward is a supporting actor. Like that's what his strength is, and he really pops when you give him a strong supporting character. But building a whole movie around him, maybe that just didn't work.
No, I don't think it did, Cam. I love to like do yes and with our conversations, but I don't have anything more to say on how to improve him, and it just feels like such a they've obviously got such a rich tapestry of information and all these books to tap into, all these things about this obviously this big character who has 150 books, and yet what we get is beige.
Is Remo Williams smart?
No, but then he's meant to be the best cop in New York.
I guess, but like you have that scene at the end where he like shows up at the bad guy's base and meets up with Kate Mulgrew and gets brought right into like the villain scenario, and it's the laziest written scenario possible where it's just like I don't know, this character just like wanders into the scene. Like there is no work done a lot of the time when it comes to Remo Williams infiltrating this espionage plot.
And you have him meeting up for the second time with Kate Mulgrew's character Major Fleming, which that has to be an Ian Fleming nod. Um,
Oh
and
yeah, oh it
has
has
to
to be,
be, has
yeah.
to be. But then she just says, "Oh, you must be military intelligence." And he just says, "Yeah, I guess." There's no intelligence in Remo Williams.
My name is Remo Sigyn Smythe.
I mean, when your name came off of a bedpan, you know you've got problems.
That felt very appropriate, by the
Yeah,
way.
yeah. I only caught that on the second viewing, and that's probably my highlight. It's right at the beginning. Yeah. Well, we touched on it earlier, but obviously this is meant to be a spy film. What is the plot, Cam? Tell me what is the grand spy plot of this film?
Well, there's like an evil industrialist who works his name is George Grove, and he runs Grove Industries, although as a character pronounces it later Industries. um and they are manufacturing AR-60 assault rifles that are faulty. And there seems to be some sort of ruse about the HARP safety network, or I'm not even sure what it would be called, satellite network, something like a defense system that's all fraudulent, and he just wants to make money selling faulty machine guns to the army, I guess. And that's how Kate Mulgrew's character starts to investigate this and how Remo Williams gets brought into this whole plot. I mean, as far as spy movie plots, I guess it's fine. I don't have an issue with an evil industrialist who wants to make money. That completely makes sense to me. But as you said, George Grove is played by Charles Cioffi. This is like the most forgettable performance in the history of SpyHards podcast. So like I have nothing to hold on to. So I'm kind of just left going like whatever. I don't care because the thing is like the way they're introducing Remo into the plot feels like a shoulder shrug. So there's like no momentum to the story whatsoever.
This film kind of reminds me a lot of what movies seem to do nowadays, where they set up a sequel. It feels like this film is devoted to setting up Remo and Chion,
Yeah.
and everything else is just there so there is a plot, so the film can have a beginning, middle, and end. But really, that's not important. It's just about making Remo.
Well, I mean, and you can say a lot of superhero movies do that, where the first film, they don't really do origin stories as much nowadays. But think of, we referenced Doctor Strange earlier. That's a good example. The movie is all about the training of Doctor Strange, and the character of Caecilius, played by Mads Mikkelsen, the villain, is very one note and kind of just doesn't really matter that much in the scheme of things. But I think the thing is, they make the training of Doctor Strange the story unto itself. So that is interesting, and you have interesting personalities factoring into that, like Chiwetel Ejiofor's character Mordo. Um, that I could care about. That's a problem. Remo Williams, all the training stuff is pretty boring, and then the villain plot, which that's fine if it's not the most fleshed out. It is an origin story, but the villain is so boring. You don't even have a charismatic actor playing the villain, and it just feels so just like off the shelf that there's just nothing to care about. It's a boring training plot along with a boring villain plot.
Yeah, at least with Doctor Strange, as you mentioned, the training is interesting, and obviously you can see his powers growing because it's more of a visual thing. He can like make the shields, and then he can like teleport and all kinds of things like that. Remo's skills that he developed is semi running on water, I think,
Yeah.
and he can poke people really hard.
And also, we should note Doctor Strange, the character played by Benedict Cumberbatch, is far more compelling, and so he is the center of that movie.
Yeah, oh, absolutely as well. Before we get on to like maybe a deeper dive into the characters, I do want to have a shout out to a couple of things I actually did enjoy about this film.
hmm
I think we should do that. And I mentioned the soundtrack at the start. I think that was great, which we've shouted out to the creator. But the stunt work in this film is quite impressive at times.
Yeah, like Remo Williams is kind of a gymnast, and so you get a lot of action scenes where, like, I really enjoyed the sequence where he's on scaffolding, and they've hired three evil construction workers to beat him up or kill him.
Which I'll pause you for a second. Do you know how much that the bad guy paid them to kill this guy?
No, how much was it?
$60.
Well, I guess these construction workers work cheap.
So that's $20 each. There's three guys. Hey, if I pay you $20, will you kill Tyler for me?
Yeah, exactly. Tyler, friend of the show, we should say, who was on our 3 Days of the Condor episode. Yeah, exactly. It makes no sense whatsoever. And in construction, you actually make really good money. So I don't know. But that whole sequence on the scaffolding, I thought was fantastic. I love seeing stuntmen doing practical stunts in these movies.
Yeah, and there were shots, as we mentioned earlier, that you could tell Fred Ward was doing it.
Yeah,
It's not like one of these like late Sean Connery Bond films where anything action is definitely not him.
yeah, and there was just moments throughout that scaffolding fight where it was like, "Oh, I feel like I haven't really seen this before." You know, I've seen people on scaffoldings or people on high situations having to scale down a building or something like that to their peril. But I felt like this one, it was just showing me some beats along the way that I just hadn't really seen, and I really enjoyed that.
The only other thing that springs to mind in terms of stunt work is when he's hanging off the log, which is being dangled from a crane, I think, which kind of reminds me of Mission Impossible Fallout. But that film did it a lot better.
Scott, did you understand how that log wound up in the air?
No, 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 no. But by that last sort of 10 minutes of the film, both times I was almost gone.
Yeah,
My eyes had rolled back into my skull. I couldn't follow anything.
well, it's a very underwhelming finale. And the movie also, it kind of wants to have exciting action, but undercuts it with so much cartoonishness. Like, I couldn't tell if this movie was trying to do Naked Gun style comedy because so much of the martial arts is played as like totally ridiculous. And, you have like a sequence where he's stuck in a gas chamber and he's fighting this villain who has a diamond tooth. And the guy's wearing a gas mask in the chamber, kind of a fun setup, I guess. But he pulls off the gas mask and uses the guy's diamond tooth to cut bulletproof glass and then dives through the glass. And I'm like, well, this is clearly like a Looney Tunes moment. But then I'm like, am I supposed to be taking the other action seriously and being excited by it? I have no idea. The tone is really strange.
Well, because right before he jumps through that window, he like plucks the guy's eye out with his finger.
Yeah.
And I'm talking brutally as well. You see like blood explode in the guy's gas mask, and then he's like barrel rolling through a window, all over the place. But Cam, I did want to make a quick mention. I would love to learn Sinanju
Right.
for this one skill. Did you know if you become even a sort of adept at Sinanju that you could dodge bullets by spinning in a circle?
I kind of like that gimmick. It's kind
What?
well, it's just felt like different. I'm like, well, I mean, I've seen that in Wanted, I guess, with Angelina Jolie and James McAvoy. But I was like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. I haven't really seen this before. If you're going to do, I guess, a fake magical martial art, that's something.
Well, I get the Matrix style agent dodges of bullets where they kind of like drop sideways and stuff. That's fine.
Mhm.
But at one point, he's literally just like spinning in a circle at a very slow speed. He's thinking, this guy's going to get shot. What is he doing?
Well, like Joel Grey is like trained in dance, right? Like he was in cabaret.
Hmm.
He has a very strong sense of physicality. So I guess you can say that's the one kind thing can say about that performance is that Joel Grey physically can do some really impressive things.
I'm
Um,
talking about Fred Ward.
I know. That's what I'm going to say. Into Fred Ward cannot. Fred Ward is not a dancer.
No, no, sir.
So
He's not agile.
it's like, the movie Batman Returns is a favorite of mine. But if you watch, there's a scene in the streets where he's fighting two clowns. And we get this like kind of long shot of Michael Keaton basically crouching over and running in a circle. And it's the most clunky looking thing possible. But that's what Remo Williams reminded me of, was an actor who the camera is just putting him. They are not cutting away, and they're like, come on, Fred, you got to pull this off. And Fred Ward is just kind of like awkwardly like lumbering in a circle.
Spin, Fred. Spin. Faster. Yeah.
And I apologize for using the term lumbering when we were talking about lumber earlier.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a Remo Williams joke right there.
At least it got a reaction out of me, that one.
True. I did appreciate, this is a very small moment, the we were talking about the training earlier and the martial arts stuff. The moment where he's hanging off the Ferris wheel at Coney Island. I thought that looked pretty cool.
Yeah, that was the other one I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
It did make me wonder what the health and safety laws are like in the 80s. But because that was definitely the actual roller coaster on Coney Island.
Yeah, it was, and it looked pretty badass. I have a question though, jumping off of Remo. He works for Cure. What did you think of the Cure organization run under Wilford Brimley? Like, what did you make of the way they operate day to day?
This organization can't get much done. Honestly, they have like one agent, one handler, and then Mr. Diabetes himself, Wilford Brimley,
Uh-huh.
just staring at a screen, listening to computers recapping stuff to him. And then apparently they'll kill themselves if they get caught.
I love that in my world, though, no one's ever looking for them. And these guys just like clutching suicide pills while no one in the world cares who they are.
They're probably going to take that J.A. Preston's character to a hospital afterwards, but no, he just cut his own oxygen off and just killed himself.
And they're like, who was this? Who was that man? We have no idea.
We'll try to help.
Wilford Brimley had to expend so little energy for this role. I kind of admire it. He literally sits in a chair watching a computer monitor for 2 hours straight. And every time they cut to him, it's the 80s computer like Jumpin' Jack Flash 2 where it's getting a TV signal. So he's like watching streaming videos, which bullshit. Like I remember 1998 trying to watch the Phantom Menace trailer on a, I don't know what type of computer I had at that point, but it was not easy.
No, you have to wait 20 minutes just to get a 5-second clip.
That was the most underwhelming way to experience footage from the Phantom Menace ever.
I mean, it didn't really help the final experience. I did it.
No, I just remember like I got a frozen shot while it was buffering of Padme's, or I guess Amidala's silver ship.
Right.
And that was my takeaway from that teaser because that was really the only image I could make out in 1998. So the fact that in 1985, Wilford Brimley is watching crystal clear, almost 4K imagery on a computer monitor is absurd.
I watch a lot of Red Letter Media on YouTube.
Mm.
And they have a series called Best of the Worst. I don't know if you've ever actually watched any of them. But they basically cover like really bad B movies.
Right.
And there's an actor that seems to appear in a lot of them. And I can't remember the name of the actor, so this is a really bad reference. But basically, he just sits down in all of his films and like phones his performance in. But he knows he's in B movies. But apparently, he had like some name value earlier in his career, so he just now does B movies.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure someone listening will send us the name or we'll find it afterwards. But Wilford Brimley's performance reminds me of that exactly. He would just turn up and like he'd probably have the script in front of him by the computer screen and just be reading the lines.
And I like Wilford Brimley. He's great in Cocoon or The Thing, but this performance does not have a lot of energy going for it, like the movie itself, I guess.
Yeah, you said it earlier on, and it's stuck in my head. It's dead on arrival.
Yeah, and I mean the handler, McCleary, um, he's fine. He's kind of your standard tough talking trainer, or not trainer, I guess handler. But again, this movie it introduces all these characters, but doesn't do anything interesting with them. So like Wilford Brimley does nothing. McCleary, I guess he goes on a mission, but it's not a particularly interesting mission. And
He's got one hand, I
he does.
guess.
Oh, that's right. They introduced that later, and that ties into the Doberman story. And honestly, I thought those Dobermans were the highlight of the whole movie.
My dog didn't like those Dobermans, I'll tell you that. But when they started doing like tightrope walking,
Okay, I mean the fact that they set it up where there's like Remo goes up onto like a scaffolding in this building. And he's like, haha, the dogs can't get me up here. And then we see two dogs jump up and pull down a fire escape with their teeth. I was like, I'm on board. I buy this 100%. These
they
dogs
worked in tandem. They worked in
Yes.
tandem, Cam.
It was synchronized that these two dogs jump at the exact same time. It was like in John Wick 3, where Halle Berry has the two German shepherds that work in, synchronized movements. That's what these two Dobermans did.
Honestly, I don't know what the film is going for at any given point. It goes back to tone again, but these Dobermans, like, there is even a shot where the dog is considering going over the tightrope. Like, the dog's actually thinking about it. They've managed to shoot it, so the dog's like, and then lo and behold, he walks across it. You can see that it's obviously like a matte painting he's walking on. But what? Does it want me to laugh? Does it want me to take it seriously?
I know, that's the thing. It's like half spoof movie, half we want you to take this seriously. Because you have the moment where Remo, it's like right around that dog sequence, like a rat like runs up his pant leg and he's pulling the whole like ooh ah back and forth, and it's like okay, it's like I'm watching The Naked Gun, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know what to make of this thing, Cam. There's only one more like good thing I want to shout out, and I think I'm going to start wrapping this up.
Yeah, the I want to just acknowledge though, like going back just to Guy Hamilton for a sec. Diamonds Are Forever has the same kind of issue where like it's super campy, and I think what we enjoy about that movie, and I look forward to tackling it on the podcast, is the camp value and just how silly it is and how it lives in a world of camp. The movie Diamonds Are Forever doesn't ask you to really invest in the action sequences. And I think that's the difference here, is that this movie wants to be really silly a lot of the time, but then wants you to care about very elaborately constructed action sequences.
Well, it's also like the way that things like Diamonds Are Forever are shot. It's quite cheerful and colourful. Even the later Bond films that he did as well. Whereas, that scene with the dogs, that whole infiltration into the place to do a thing, I don't remember,
Mm-hmm.
is barely. It's like all grey and black. You can't make anything out. It's dull.
Well, I mean, in the 80s too, they switched to a cheaper film stock, so a lot of 80s movies look like garbage. And this is definitely I think a pretty good candidate for the title of garbage looking 80s movies.
Okay, so I had one shout out left to make, and then I have a question for you.
Okay.
The shout out is, we've already mentioned her, but the only sort of character I kind of liked was Kate Mulgrew's character.
Yeah, like I like that they are presenting her as a very capable character. She's not a damsel in distress, although the movie kind of sidelines her later in the movie for sure. But I like that early on she's very proactive in investigating this fraudulent harp network, and that something's not right. I need to figure out what this is. And she goes to see her boss, who makes kind of a patronizing like, "You don't have to try so hard. I don't care that you're a woman." And she says, "Well, I don't care that you're a man." Like I like that she gets those kind of comments, because Kate Mulgrew, going off Star Trek Voyager, is one of the great icons of Star Trek. Very important character in pop culture, and Kate Mulgrew has like an intelligence about her. I can't imagine ever casting Kate Mulgrew as like a dumb character, and I like that the movie doesn't try to do that.
The problem I have, and I would say this is a on the page problem, because I think Kate tries her damn best with what she's given.
Mm-hmm.
She sells it as much as she can. Is that this whole like feminism point of view they're going with is just a veneer? Because then you've got the Chion character. I don't know. making her climax with a touch of her wrist.
Yeah, and he also has a comment to her where he says something like "women belong in the home making babies" or something, and it's
I have
like,
it. I have it written down. I have the quote for you.
yeah,
Women should stay home and make babies.
yeah, and you're like,
Great.
oh god.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I like Kate Mulgrew in the movie, but we should also just acknowledge this character doesn't really get even that much screen time, and they try to like inject a forced romance with her and Remo in like one moment in the movie later on.
Hmm.
And it's like, oh, this is making my skin crawl because this is so unearned. And this character is presented as smart and he's an idiot. Um, yeah, it's just like, it's one of those characters that you can kind of say, well, like Kate Mulgrew brings a lot of fire to this character, but she's barely in the movie and the movie doesn't really care about her whatsoever.
No, it's another one of those characters that actually probably had more. She could have delivered, but it just wasn't there. There was nothing to work with.
Yeah, yeah, for
The
sure.
opposite of Fred Ward, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question for you before we have the question.
Okay.
There's 150 books, you're telling me,
Hmm.
or so. They tried to do a TV pilot after this.
Yeah.
If you rebooted it and did it again now, what would you do and who would you cast?
Okay, well, number one, I'd cast a Korean actor as Cheon.
Yep,
That's the easy
that's
choice.
that's an
Um,
easy one.
but I don't. Okay, maybe this is a larger question, but like, can you make this now? Like the idea of like the wise Korean martial artist training this like white secret agent, like, is that something you would ever do nowadays? I feel like the only way they would do it would be doing something like Green Hornet did, where the Green Hornets played as an idiot the whole time. But like,
Mm.
is that what an audience wants either? Because that's something that I feel like hasn't really worked in terms of audiences enjoying it, because Green Hornet didn't do particularly well. They did the same thing with Tonto in the Lone Ranger movie. And audiences didn't really like that movie at all either. I don't know that that is even a shtick that, they could approach that with, in terms of reversing the power dynamics in that relationship. I don't know. Like, that's why I do wonder, is this Remo Williams character salvageable in 2021?
It's hard to say. You know, I would take your first thing. Obviously, you have a Korean actor playing Cheon, but you could play with the genders.
Yeah.
If you think about how like no one liked this film, but when they remade the Karate Kid,
I like that film.
oh really? I heard it got like trashed in reviews. I never saw it.
I kind of like the Karate Kid remake. I thought Jackie Chan was fantastic in it, and the martial arts was actually really well done.
Well, that's
It's
what you got to do. It's right there.
it's too long for sure, but I mostly was positive on it.
Well, they changed a few things. I mean, was the Karate Kid a girl in this remake?
No, it was Jaden Smith. There was a Karate Kid 4 with Hilary Swank, but I also want to acknowledge that the Karate Kid remake was called The Karate Kid. It was set in China, and he was learning kung fu.
Ah,
Right. So problems right there too.
it may be a bad analogy then. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I think with all of these books, there's probably something there. There's something that must tap into some sort of zeitgeist in America that they want to hear these stories.
Do they? Have you ever heard anyone talk about Remo Williams novels? I definitely never have.
Just you all the time.
I've never seen a Remo Williams novel in like a used bookstore.
They don't never trade them back in, Cam. They keep them forever.
Well, I do have a library behind me, and each one is, wrapped in dustproof plastic.
Your Remo wall.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you don't think a reboot is salvageable then?
I mean, I think a lot of work is going to go into altering what the concept of the series is, and at that point, I go, why bother? Like, no one is screaming to the heavens, "Where's my Remo Williams update?"
I think we're the only ones now.
No, I don't know that I'm screaming for it either. Honestly, after watching this movie.
Okay, I don't have any sort of follow up notes apart from the fact that I think this feels like a TV film.
Yeah, well, it really does. And that whole finale on Mount Promise feels like the sort of thing in like a, I don't know, 80s action show like the A-Team or something, or Hunter.
Yeah, absolutely. Not to say that they were underwhelming, but they were a TV show. You just understood it for what it was.
Yeah, it's cartoonish, but it's also like they said the budget was cut, and I believe it because it looks cheap, and you kind of end it like when he threw that villain over top of the jeep and was walking away. I was like, "Is that seriously the fate of that villain?" Like I was flabbergasted.
I have nothing for you, honestly. This film, it doesn't even frustrate me like some other ones have. It didn't have anything to start off with, and it didn't deliver.
Yeah, like I really thought when we would tackle this one, it would be a much more fun, somewhat less problematic 80s action movie where we could really kind of like laugh at it the way we did. We enjoyed watching Condor Man. Condor Man's way better than this movie. Condor Man knows its tone. Well, once it figures it out halfway through the movie or something. But Condor Man is just a better movie. There's a lot of 80s movies we've tackled that weren't great, but I feel like they just delivered something a little more. Remo Williams is just kind of it's just flatlining throughout. I mean, it is like that guy cutting his oxygen supply. I mean, Remo Williams cuts its own oxygen supply very shortly into the movie.
Or if they didn't, I'd do it for myself.
True, true.
Okay, Cam. Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins. Is it making the knock list?
100% yes. How could you not put Remo Williams on the knock list? No chance in hell.
I want to set fire to any knock list that this features on.
Yeah, I mean, Remo Williams couldn't land a sequel. He ain't landing himself on the knock list. This is a deeply bad movie.
If the 11th commandment was thou shalt not get away with it, the 12th has to be thou shalt never watch Remo Williams.
What is insane though was after I watched the movie, I'm like, okay, this is obviously a horrifically dated movie, and it feels like it would have been dated even in '85. But I went online because I'm like, okay, this has to be a movie that people are angry about now, right? No, there are so many people that are still super nostalgic about this movie. It's crazy. And I don't know. I guess I've always had the ability to watch things that I enjoyed as a child and be like, oh, that doesn't hold up so well. There are a lot of Remo Williams fans out in the world, and I find it kind of crazy.
I mean, there are crazy people out there, but those aside, I don't know about these reviews, but anyone who can look back on this and not see the problems, and you could just take it for what it is, I think you're not really looking at it the right way. I understand nostalgia. It's a lot of what I consume in terms of media is nostalgia driven, but there's a limit, and if it's this big of a problem that we're having to address it constantly on this episode, and quite rightly so, it shouldn't be allowed to continue. You shouldn't really be enjoying this film.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like this is a movie. Do you think it'll be lost to the sands of time? Like, in a world of streaming networks, and we've seen that like Disney, for example, is struggling with what movies to put on their streaming network and which ones to not put on there, period. And there's a lot of discussion now about I know Turner Classic Movies is doing a series on problematic films,
Mm-hmm.
and they're looking at Gone with the Wind, they're looking at Psycho, Rope, Breakfast at Tiffany's, and the idea is to provide cultural context for these movies and explain why they have a level of importance going forward. um, I don't know what you do with a Remo Williams where it's like a bad movie, and what are you arguing for, really? Other than I enjoy the campiness of it. So, like, I feel like this is a movie that is probably just going to vanish with coming generations.
I read Doctor No before we did our episode on it, and I mentioned on our review that there's a whole sort of chapter before the book starts from a sort of a scholar that just says like, try and take it for what it is. It's a problematic book. There's problematic things in the book, but there's also some good stuff here. And they have to do that because it's James Bond. It's Ian Fleming. And you can kind of go, okay, fair enough. But this is Fred Ward. This is Remo Williams. No one's writing a precursor bit to this film. It should just be buried.
Yeah, it's the type of thing. I think it did get like a boutique Blu-ray release, so it's not even in like wide circulation. I think the DVD was out there, but the Blu-ray was not really. This movie is probably not going to be showing up on Netflix anytime soon. So I do think in a streaming world, it'll be kind of one of those movies that older film fans may talk about, but I can't picture a lot of 20-something-year-old film fans ever watching this movie.
Well, I never gave you my answer, just in case you were wondering, Cam. No.
Yeah, it's a Reno.
It's a Reno from me. So, yeah, it looks like the dossier on Remo Williams, dead and quite rightly so, is complete and filed as classified. Before we talk about what we're doing next week, we have a quick message from the team at Cinematic Blind Spots. Cam, roll the clip.
Hey guys, I'm Adam.
And I'm Josh.
And we are Cinematic Blind Spots, the podcast where two movie lovers will introduce each other to a new film every week.
No matter the year or the genre, nothing is off limits.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget to follow us on all the socials. And remember,
whether you are in your car or in the theater, always check your blind spots.
I mean, that's appropriate for Remo Williams, which was a cinematic blind spot for me. So check out that podcast to find out some more movies you may have missed, and hopefully they're better than Remo Williams.
Yeah, so that's Cinematic Blind Spots. You can, of course, find them on all major podcast apps. But Cam, what are we doing next week?
Well, Scott, we are wrapping up another franchise. We are going to be tackling Jason Bourne, the final Jason Bourne film starring Matt Damon.
I actually haven't seen this one. Which is odd because I'd seen all the other ones before we reviewed them. So I'm quite looking forward to actually just finishing off the franchise, just personally, just actually to watch the last film. I never caught it in theaters.
Yeah, and we're going to be having the hosts from the Chicklet Pod on the show, and that'll be a lot of fun, I think. We popped over and did Who Framed Roger Rabbit on their show. They're going to come wrap up Bourne with us. So I think this will be a really, really fun episode.
Yeah, it absolutely will. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to watch Jason Bourne and join us next week. You can, of course, find the knock list at letterboxd.com/SpyHards. And you can, of course, follow us discreetly on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, suck wall.